The Tragic Lives of Colombia's First Presidents, narrated by Professor Franklin Booton Soto. In this bonus episode, we will talk about the lives of several of the very first presidents of the nation. From the very first inception, the early rulers and executive leaders of New Granada, later Colombia, were not dry names in a chronology. During the harsh repression known later as the Regimen del Terror, Spanish commanders executed many revolutionary leaders. Others were exiled and disgraced and died far from their homes. In a very short period of time, what is now called the Republic of Colombia was led by a series of presidents. They were vivid, ambitious, fearful, proud, often brilliant men living through collapse, civil war, imprisonment, betrayal, revolution, and in many cases, deep personal loves marked by separation, death, scandal, and exile. Their surviving letters, speeches, legal papers, military dispatches, memoirs, and family recollections reveal personalities far more dramatic than a schoolbook list. What follows is a historically grounded narrative, distinguishing documented fact from later folklore where possible, and including romance, private life, and revealing quotations from correspondence. Jorge Tadeo Lozano. He was born in 1771 into an aristocratic Creole family of Santa Fe de Bogota. Jorge Tadeo Lozano was one of the most cultivated men of his generation. He studied natural science, administration, and philosophy. He represented a more polished old regime elite, adapting to revolution. Before politics consumed him, he devoted energy to zoology and the study of the natural world. He married within elite society and embodied the image of the gentleman reformer. Elegant, educated, and restrained. When independence began, old aristocratic rivalries did not disappear. They simply changed language. Men who once competed for offices under the crown now competed for Republican titles. Lozano briefly became head of state, then was pushed aside amid factional struggle. Narino's camp considered him weak. Contemporaries often described him as courteous and soft-spoken. Critics, especially the followers of Antonio Narino, considered him too hesitant for revolutionary times. One line attributed to the political climate around him was that New Granada needed men of vigor, not ceremony. Though not Lozano's own words, it captured the criticism he faced. During the Spanish Reconquest, he was arrested and executed on July 6, 1816. Later patriotic memory said he faced death with serenity and Christian composure. Exact dialogue is uncertain, but family accounts consistently portray dignity. His story became tragic in retrospect. A family man and scholar destroyed by war. For a man who is often poorly remembered by modern generations, he persists in local Colombian myth, as the Bogotá folklore in the 19th century occasionally linked executed patriots, including Lozano, to haunted colonial plazas where gentlemen in old dress walked at dusk. While these are urban legends, not historical claims, it still serves to preserve the memory of one of Colombia's former presidents. Number 2. Antonio Narino. If one man embodied intellect, vanity, courage, and controversy, it was Antonio Narino. Born into a wealthy family in Bogota in 1765, Narino moved in elite circles. Narino became famous for translating and printing the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in 1794. This was treated by Spanish authorities as dangerous subversion. That decision brought prison, confiscation, and years of persecution. His newspaper La Bagatella became a weapon of ideas. He wrote with sarcasm and precision. One of his known political lines was, "I love my country more than my own life." That sentiment, repeated in different forms in patriotic tradition, reflects the tone of his writings and conduct. His private correspondence shows a man obsessed with honor, reputation, and vindication. He repeatedly defended himself against accusations, complained of injustice, and demanded recognition for sacrifice. Friends admired his brilliance. Enemies found him arrogant. During the independence years, he became leader of the centralist state of Cundinamarca, centered in Bogotá. His rivals, especially federalists, accused him of wanting personal power. Romantic and domestic life, unlike some military caudillos, Narino is not remembered for a trail of famous mistresses. His scandal was political rather than erotic. Yet the strain of prison, exile, confiscations, and constant intrigue deeply affected his household. His family endured uncertainty for years. He married Magdalena Ortega y Mesa, who was from another respected elite family. Surviving records suggest a real and durable marriage, tested by repeated imprisonments and separation. Marriage in that world was romantic for some, but also political and economic. Families built alliances through marriage, dowries, and shared status, while Nerino became a public martyr. Magdalena bore private burdens, debts, household management, children, and uncertainty. Betrayal and revenge. Nerino believed many former allies abandoned him. He never forgot insults. His political battles with Federalists became personal. Pamphlets attacked his character, intelligence, and motives. One recurring theme in his letters is the bitterness of a man who believed he gave everything and received suspicion in return. The tragic ending: he survived the execution waves of 1816, but spent years sick, attacked, and financially ruined. He died in 1823, celebrated by some, hated by others. Nerino was brilliant, cutting, proud, energetic, and often impossible to ignore. In letters from captivity, Nerino repeatedly requested news of family and home. Even when discussing politics, concern for domestic life appears between the lines. Captured after the Southern Campaign, he spent years imprisoned in Spain. Folklore says he insisted on proper dress and manners even in confinement, whether embellished or not. Contemporaries agree he fiercely guarded dignity. For modern Colombian history scholars, Antonio Nariño remains one of the most magnetic founders of Colombia. Number 3. Manuel Bernardo Alvarez. Born in 1743, Manuel Bernardo Alvarez represented an older generation shaped by colonial legal culture. He was linked by family ties to Nariño and became president of Cundinamarca after him. Observers described him as sober, methodical, cautious, and serious. Unlike younger firebrands, Alvarez seemed to prefer order and legal continuity. But legal temperament could not save a collapsing republic. When Simón Bolívar entered Bogotá in 1814 after conflict among patriots, Alvarez lost power, arrested during the Reconquest. He was executed in 1816. A later tradition claims that before death he lamented patriot disunity more than Spanish vengeance. The exact wording is uncertain, but the theme appears often in memoirs of the period. He stands as one of the fathers of the nation consumed by faction. Number 4. Camilo Torres Tenorio, the elegant lawyer born in 1766. Camilo Torres Tenorio was among the greatest legal minds of the era. Camilo Torres came from a distinguished family and was one of the finest legal minds of his generation. Cultivated, polished, and politically sophisticated, he represented the elite Creole class that wanted greater autonomy. He authored the famous Memorial de Agravios in 1809, protesting discrimination against American-born subjects of the Spanish monarchy. One of its enduring themes was equality of political rights. Torres believed liberty required institutions, law, and representation. He was known as eloquent, learned, proud, and deeply serious. Contemporaries described him as intelligent, refined, persuasive, and conscious of status. He belonged to a society where manners, lineage, and reputation mattered intensely. Marriage and kinship networks were central to politics. Families advanced together. A man's cousins, in-laws, and compadres could matter as much as formal institutions. Torres became a principal Federalist rival of Nariño. Their dispute was ideological but also deeply personal. Each believed the other endangered the cause. The conflict between these camps helped fracture patriot unity during the period later mocked as La Patria Boba, the foolish fatherland. Critics said he trusted Congresses too much in wartime. Admirers said he was building a republic worthy of survival. Captured during the collapse of the patriot cause, he was executed in 1816. Later accounts describe his family's grief and the harsh treatment of his remains, intended to intimidate the public. What happened to Camilo Torres Tenorio and his remains? Camilo Torres Tenorio was executed by Spanish royalist authorities in Bogotá on October 5, 1816, during the repression led by Pablo Morillo. The treatment of his remains became one of the most notorious symbols of that era's brutality. What happened to his body? After execution, Contemporary and near-contemporary accounts state that Torres's body was dismembered. His head, hands, and feet were reportedly displayed publicly in different locations as a warning to rebels, while the torso was buried separately or disposed of without honor. This practice was intended to terrorize the population and discourage further resistance. Public display of body parts was an old imperial punishment used for treason in parts of the Spanish world, though by the early 1800s it was already shocking to many observers. Why was it done? The Spanish Reconquest government wanted to make examples of leading patriots. Torres was not just any rebel, he was highly educated. That he authored the famous Memorial de Agravios. He had served in senior leadership. He symbolized Creole political legitimacy. Destroying his body publicly was meant to destroy his symbolic authority. How reliable is this? The broad claim that his remains were mutilated and displayed is widely repeated in Colombian historiography and patriotic memory. Exact details vary by source because records from the repression period are incomplete and later nationalist retellings sometimes dramatized events. So the careful historical conclusion is very likely true. Body was mutilated after execution and parts displayed. Less certain, precise placement details and some dramatic embellishments. Historical impact: instead of erasing him, it turned Torres into a martyr. Later generations remembered the treatment of his remains as evidence of royalist cruelty during the Régimen del Terror of 1816. For his family, it meant more than death. It denied normal mourning, burial rites, and dignity. That was part of the punishment. Camilo Torres was executed, but the authorities wanted his corpse to keep speaking fear after death. Instead, it spoke memory. His tragedy symbolizes constitutional patriotism crushed by terror. Number 5. José Fernández Madrid, who is unfortunately often remembered by historians as a coward, born in 1789 in Cartagena. José Fernández Madrid was physician, poet, intellectual, and statesman. He rose young because educated leadership was scarce during crisis. But, when royalist victory seemed imminent, he attempted negotiation and clemency. When that failed, he fled. Some later patriots branded this cowardice. Enemies called him weak. Supporters called him realistic. Others argue he faced a hopeless situation and tried to preserve lives. Reputation in this era could be destroyed by one decision, even though he assumed power in 1816 when military defeat was already near. He later wrote with the melancholy tone common to exiles. One phrase associated with men of his generation was that exile was a living death far from one's country. Though expressed in varying forms across Latin American correspondence, it captures his experience. He later lived abroad and rebuilt a diplomatic career, but the accusation lingered. In societies obsessed with masculine honor, being called timid could be politically fatal. While not a martyr in the traditional sense, he was still forced to flee his homeland. His life suggests not every founder was a warrior. Some were scholars trapped in war. Number 6. Custodio Garcia Rovira. Custodio Garcia Rovira was a lawyer, scholar, military officer, and patriot leader during the independence wars of what is now Colombia. He is remembered primarily as one of the young civilian intellectual leaders who rose rapidly during the revolutionary crisis. He served briefly as president of the United Provinces of New Granada during the collapse of the First Republic. Born in 1780, Custodio Garcia Rovira combined education with military service. Garcia Rovira belonged to the educated Creole class that supplied many independence leaders. He studied law and philosophy, likely at institutions tied to the colonial educational network in Bogota. Contemporary accounts portray him as intelligent, disciplined, and serious-minded. Before the wars fully escalated, he worked in legal and administrative roles. Like many educated men of his generation, he moved from reformist politics into open independence once the crisis of the Spanish monarchy began in 1808. When local juntas emerged after 1810, New Granada fractured into competing governments. Garcia Rovira aligned with the patriot cause and became active in the Federalist camp. He rose quickly because many older colonial officials were discredited or removed. War created demand for literate administrators, and educated men were scarce and valuable. He was willing to serve in both political and military roles. He became governor and military commander in the eastern provinces, especially around the Socorro and Tunja political sphere, as the republic collapsed in 1816. He assumed responsibility in desperate circumstances. Garcia Rovira became president of the United Provinces of New Granada, one of the Republican governments struggling to survive. This was one of the worst possible moments to take office because Spanish expeditionary forces under Pablo Morillo were advancing, the patriot armies were divided, while finances were exhausted and rival provinces distrusted each other. Many leaders had already fled or been captured. So although he held the title of president, he had little real ability to govern a stable nation. He inherited disaster, captured by royalists. He was executed by firing squad. He was shot in Bogota on August 8, 1816. He was only in his mid-30s. Garcia Rovira represents a recurring type in Latin American independence history, an educated civilian turned wartime leader forced into command by institutional collapse. He was given responsibility without resources and punished with death after defeat. He was less flamboyant than Antonio Nariño or Simón Bolívar, so he is less famous today, but he was highly respected in his time. Patriotic memory presents him as calm and stoic. A recurring anecdote says he refused to beg for mercy, whether literally true or stylized later. It matches his reputation for firmness. He became a model of duty joined to sacrifice. Number 7. Fernando Solano Uribe. Fernando Solano Uribe is a lesser-known figure from the independence era of what is now Colombia. He appears in regional and political records connected to the revolutionary years in New Granada, especially in the eastern provinces linked to the Santander region. Unlike famous names such as Antonio Nariño or Castorio Garcia Rovira, Solano Uribe did not become a major national symbol, which is why modern summaries often overlook him, even though he served as president of the nation from June of 1816 to September of that same year. His term was short like many leaders during that turbulent era. He was the last president of the United Provinces of New Granada before the reconquest by the Spaniards. Because documentation on him is scattered and thinner than for top leaders, historians reconstruct his role through provincial records, official correspondence, and mentions in biographies of better-known contemporaries. Fernando Solano Uribe may not be as well known, but figures like him kept governments functioning during chaos. He was a lawyer from the Our Lady of the Rosary University and served as the governor of the province of Pamplona and drafted its constitution in 1815. He served when armies retreated, communications broke down, and trust evaporated. In fact, even after the Spanish regained control of the country, he continued to serve in the army. Sources portray him as dutiful rather than theatrical. He died in February 1819 from wounds suffered in battle, at the age of 29 while traveling to participate in the Congress of Angostura to form the proclamation of the Republic of Colombia after Simon Bolivar's victory of the Spanish. He lived just long enough to see his young nation free itself once again, and he was an important part of those efforts. Number 9. Juan Nepomuceno Moreno. Juan Nepomuceno Moreno belongs to the shadowed generation that sustained legitimacy in the eastern plains before final victory. This was the world of the llanos, mud, horses, scarcity, raids, and endurance. Men there needed persistence more than ceremony, though less documented than famous names. Such leaders kept the Republican cause alive between defeats and triumph. Their letters often concerned supplies, discipline, desertion, and survival, the unromantic backbone of independence. Number 9. The great Simón Bolívar. Though not one of the earliest presidents of New Granada in 1810, Bolívar dominated the later 1819 to 1830 era and cannot be omitted. Born in 1783, Simón Bolívar became the dominant liberator figure of northern South America. He was charismatic, intense, restless, brilliant, theatrical, and often severe. Witnesses described rapid speech, penetrating eyes, little sleep, and enormous stamina. He married Maria Teresa Rodriguez del Toro in 1802. She died less than a year later. Bolívar later wrote, "I swore not to marry again." Her death is one of the central tragedies of his emotional life. Later came his legendary relationship with Manuela Sáenz, brilliant, politically engaged, fearless. Their correspondence contains affection, teasing, strategy, and longing. Bolivar once wrote to her, "I adore you." Simple words, but revealing from a man who carried nations on his shoulders. In 1828, when conspirators tried to kill him in Bogota, Manuela helped him escape. She earned the title Libertadora del Libertar. By the late 1820s, Bolivar was surrounded by plots, factional hatred, and accusations of dictatorship. Former allies turned enemies. The 1828 conspiracy led to arrests and executions. Among the condemned was Francisco de Paula Santander's political circle, though Santander himself was exiled rather than executed. Bolivar's private letters from his final years are full of exhaustion and betrayal. In one of his most famous reflections, he wrote, "He who serves a revolution plows the sea, meaning labored in vain." No sentence better captures the loneliness of victory. He won nations, but died politically isolated in 1830 of tuberculosis after being chased out of several countries that he helped create. What these men shared. Most were educated Creoles shaped by Enlightenment ideals, then broken or transformed by war. Many loved deeply, but rarely peacefully. They married. Then prison came, they courted. Then exile came, they found passion. Then conspiracy came. Several died by firing squad. Several lost fortunes, homes, or children. Almost all were later simplified into statues. Though in life they were anxious, proud, flawed, loving, and vividly human. Final reflection. The first fathers of Colombia were not serene founders signing neat documents. They wrote constitutions by candlelight. While hearing drums in the street, they exchanged love letters. While armies marched, they debated liberty in the morning and faced execution months later. In an interesting historical footnote, the first leader of the future republic, José Miguel Pey, escaped the fate of many of his peers, mostly unscathed. He was in power from 1810-1811 and was the firstly born leader after the July 20th, 1810 uprising in Bogota. A local magistrate, Pey assumed the junta's presidency when Viceroy Antonio Omar Y. Bourbon was deposed. Unlike the others, he was not exiled, not murdered. He died naturally in 1838 after serving in various other political positions